Now we move on. Ukraine has said that its forces struck a major Russian explosive factory and an oil terminal in an occupied Crimea. The Ukrainian military has reported numerous explosions at the YM Sverdlov plant in Dzержinsk, a key site for producing RDX and HMX explosives. A fire also broke out at an oil depot in Feodosia, Crimea. Russia's governor has claimed air defenses downed 20 drones overnight, with one person injured by debris. Some homes were damaged, but Russia has denied harm to military sites. Ukraine continues targeting key Russian infrastructure as battlefield lines remain static and peace talks show no progress in the ongoing 3.5-year war. Let's listen into what Deputy Commander has said.
Безпілотники з нашої сторони, з їхньої, дрони. Тобто, хто в дронах сильніше, тот і, скажімо так, виграє цю війну. Зараз що, у нас конфлікт, на землі та в небі, ворог тисне. Ми теж робимо все можливе, щоб цей тиск якомога краще парірувати. Ну, наразі у нас паритет в цьому питанні. Ми всі свої средства, так скажемо, використовуємо, щоб їх тримати. Вони також всі свої средства, щоб нас продавити. Але наразі фронт статичний, фронт тримаємось.
This comes as Russia has launched a massive missile and drone attack on Ukraine, killing at least 5, including 4 in Lviv. Fire broke out, damaging infrastructure and leaving parts of Lviv without power. Now for this discussion, we are joined by Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief in Romania, joins us live from Bucharest. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us again. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, with the confirmation that Ukraine had, today it came that Ukraine has used domestically made missiles in recent strikes on Russian infrastructure. How does this reflect Ukraine's growing self-reliance?
I think that Ukraine, first of all, it needs to produce its own weapons. It also needs to show the rest of the world, including NATO members, EU members, that it can strike with its own, homemade, its own arms. Because there has been criticism of Ukraine that they're always holding out their hand, they're expecting other nations to step in and give them very expensive missiles. So I think with this, Ukraine is actually trying to show that it has its own weapons production and it is using them. It's not just going around with a quote-unquote begging bowl asking its Western partners in NATO and the EU for weapons. So I think Zelensky wants to make a big point of this, that we are using our weapons for our war, even though he says, that they are defending Europe. But he's showing that, Ukraine is not some helpless country with no arms production, even though it's been under massive assault for the last 3 years. It still is producing arms and is using it in its fight against Russia.
Alison, how do you think, what impact might this have on EU as well as the other countries which are hesitant in providing aid to Ukraine?
As I sort of alluded to before, I think it's a sign from Ukraine, from Kiev, that yes, thank you very much, we appreciate your weapons, we're happy that we can have them, but we do have our own weapons. And so, for example, you've seen the countries where populists won, or sovereignties, or whatever they call themselves, the far right. We just had in the Czech Republic, in Poland, in Hungary, who were saying, oh, we're giving far too much to Ukraine, and we need these for ourselves, and this is not fair, and we're provoking Russia. Well, Ukraine here is saying, no, we're doing our own fair share of the lifting. We're using our own weapons. I mean, obviously they're using weapons from other countries. We know about Patriot missiles, for example, that have come through Romania, the Tomahawk that they're discussing with the United States. They do obviously want weapons from the other countries, but I think they're trying to show that they are self-reliant and they are using their own weaponry and arms to fight this war.
Now, Alison, looking at a broader picture, given the slower pace of defense decision-making in democratic countries in EU compared to other regimes, or such as authoritarian regimes, how can Europe accelerate its defense investments and systems and cooperation without compromising its democratic values?
Well, I think it's a question like with anything cross-border, fighting crime cross-border, it's a question of cooperation, it's a question of communication, and it's a question obviously of transport routes. I know, for example, Romania, where I'm reporting from, has a long border with Ukraine in kilometers. I think it's about 640 kilometers, and it has been used to transport weapons and arms to Ukraine. So it's important, a variety of strategies, as I said, including discussion, logistics, and transport. But as you say, there is war fatigue. The populations of Europe are a bit, oh, do we have to give more help to Ukraine? We have enough problems at home. We have the what's happening in Gaza, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So there is fatigue about Ukraine. But on the other hand, unlike Gaza, Ukraine is on Europe's border and Russia is seen as a threat. But there is definitely fatigue, and I think the governments of European countries particularly, and obviously of the United States as well, are well aware of that. And as we've seen, there is now what I think Viktor Orban, he's the Hungarian Prime Minister today, said we have now a coalition of patriots in Europe, and that he's referring to Poland and the Czech Republic, and they are less keen on shipping arms to Ukraine. So it is a delicate balance, which is also probably why Ukraine is publicly saying that it's using its own weapons now.
Right. And also building on that, Alison, last week we saw Estonian Prime Minister mention that Europe is evolving from a peace project without arms to one that includes armed defense. In your view, what are the key challenges and opportunities for Europe as it strengthens its defense capabilities?
Well, I mean, a lot of the countries on the eastern flank, Poland, Hungary, if you like, Bulgaria, Romania, the Baltic countries you mentioned, are part of NATO and part of the EU. So there is cooperation and collaboration there. NATO has formed something called the Eastern Sentry, which is to beef up, to strengthen security and defense along the eastern border of NATO, which borders Ukraine and Russia as well. So that is one thing that they are doing. They're also coordinating about drones, because at the beginning when we saw the drone incursion, the violation of Polish airspace, Poland used airplanes, and that's extremely costly and not very efficient to shoot down a drone with an airplane. So I think they're discussing ways, because these drone violations look set to continue. They've happened in the Baltics, they've happened in Romania, they've happened in Poland, in Denmark, etc., etc. So I think there is discussion among NATO and EU members about how to deal with the drones, because you can't raise, you can't raise an F-16 every time there's a drone enters your airspace. It's far too expensive and is not efficient. So I think there are definitely discussions going on, communication about how do we deal with these incursions. There's also cyber attacks, which don't require weapons to bring them down. So there are different attacks. There's the cyber attacks, there's a hybrid war, and there's also, the traditional military war. So I imagine a lot of discussion is going on between NATO members to make things more efficient and smoother. And so they have in place a method to deal with various kinds of attacks, possible attacks.
With that, I would like to thank Alison Mutler for joining us and sharing that insight as a former AP Bureau-in-Chief in Romania. Now we move on to North America. The U.S. Supreme Court has declined to hear Ghislaine Maxwell's bid to